I listened to episode 1 of Meghan's podcast, so you don't have to. I mean, you can if you want to, but you don't have to. I didn't even really want to. I was gonna talk about this probably maybe when she was 5-6 episodes in or so, and then just do one episode. But I have to tell you, and I'm sure you saw from the thumbnail, when I heard that Meghan said that she had preeclampsia, I'm not going to say that she didn't have it, but I'm going to tell you something. I suffered from it when I delivered my twins in 2013. And I have quite a few things to say about it, and I'm sorry if I seem a little bit upset. Hopefully I'll just kind of relax a little bit, but I thought it was a very, very important thing to talk about because I don't really feel that it was addressed properly. If you're going to talk about the fact that you suffered from it, then you need to give your audience a little bit more context and a little bit of an explanation. Of course, you don't have to go into your complete medical history. That's what I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that she has to do that. However, I think it is doing her listeners a real disservice by not at least talking a little bit more about it, or at least asking her guest, Whitney, about it. Because if you're not going to talk about it, because it's a serious thing, if you're not going to talk about it, then why mention it? And why mention it at all on a business podcast, on a podcast that's supposed to be talking about business? But I digress. We will get into it. I'm going to talk about the episode. I made a whole bunch of notes. So I'm just going to kind of break down the episode, and I'm going to give you guys my impressions from my notes as I went through listening to it. I had to listen to it at 1.25 speed. Her voice we will get into all that. So let's just start from the beginning, shall we? I realized that I didn't even say hello and welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I appreciate so many of you, so many of my subscribers, old and new. You guys mean the absolute world to me. Thank you so much for supporting my small channel. I do apologize if you hear some lawnmowers out there. Spring has sprung where I live, and it seems like every single house on the block right now has their lawnmower going. And I was waiting to film, but I figure after about 2 hours, I'm just gonna be waiting all freaking day because it ain't stopping out there. So I do apologize if you do hear the rattle of a lawnmower. So I'm gonna just start out. I have the transcript of the podcast pulled up for certain things that I wanted to call to your attention. But the first thing I want to say is, I'm going to quote from the transcript. This is from Meghan. I love that so much. And she talks about having notes. She talks about having notes that she wanted to ask Whitney about during the interview. Apparently she didn't use these notes, but I really wish she would have, because maybe if she had something in her notes about, let's find out about Whitney's business journey, that might have been a good thing in your notes to talk about with Whitney and bring up, because this is a podcast about a self-made billionaire. Now, mind you, I had never heard of this Whitney lady before. She is the creator of the app called Bumble. She was one of the co-creators of Tinder. She's got a history. She's got stuff, and we'll get into that. But I'm a Gen Xer. Okay, I'm 51. I never was on Tinder. So I don't know about Whitney. I don't know who she is. And Meghan didn't really give us much to go on as far as her business background, how she thought of and conceived the ideas for these apps. She doesn't really go into it. It's a lot of a victim narrative pity party between these two women. I'll get into that too. But point being, she had notes, and she did not use these notes. So this is what Meghan says, quote, "I love that so much. I have all these notes I haven't looked down on. I haven't looked at any of my notes. I'm sure I've missed all sorts of points. But I mean, I've just loved being able to chat because I think it's our friendship coming through, and also just who we are as moms, as women, as people who have gone through our own unique experiences, but are able to see it through a lens of how I can help other women specifically and all." Okay, well, you're not helping me, because if I really wanted to find out how someone like Whitney became so successful in her mid-20s and beyond, and now is a billionaire, I have no idea what Whitney does. I don't know how she's successful in business. I don't know how she built up her businesses. I don't know how she's maintaining her businesses. I know nothing about Whitney's businesses after listening to this podcast. I think we all kind of knew what we were going to be in for, that there wasn't going to be any actual business talk, but there is zero business talk in this, you guys, zero. 7 minutes into the podcast and all these two are doing, and don't get me wrong, I'm sure Whitney, she sounds very nice. She sounds very lovely. But 7 minutes into the episode of this podcast, and all they're doing is complimenting and fawning over one another. All these pleasantries, all these niceties being ping-ponged back and forth, but there's no meat 7 minutes in. And I have in my notes here, 17 minutes in, they're framing their narratives, talking about how they've been a victim, how they've been victimized in their personal lives and in their professional lives. 17 minutes in on a podcast that I think it's 45, 49 minutes? 17 minutes in, I was just rolling my eyes to the heavens, asking, okay, when are we going to get into the meat? I want to know how Whitney structures her day, how she conceived of these enterprises that she found herself in. How does she market? This is the type of thing that women in business want to know. We're not going to get it, ladies and gentlemen. We're not going to get it. So it's a super long introduction, and Meghan starts the episode by giving us a little bit of backstory about Whitney, but that in of itself is really boring because she takes a really long time to talk, and she really is very precise with her voice inflections and the way that she speaks. And to me, she's got a newscaster type voice where I just really want to tell her, drop the whole newscaster persona. It's what she did in Archetypes. She was very, very formal the way that she spoke, but then it's odd. It's newscaster-like, but then with a lot of like sighing and stuff like that. It does not come across as authentic. So it was just super long. I just wanted her to get into it, or just do what other people do when they have podcasts. Popular people like Joe Rogan, Tucker Carlson, Sean Ryan, Candace Owens. These people, if they're interviewing someone, or whether they're talking about whatever they're going to talk about for that given day, they just get into it. Just get into it. You've got a guest sitting in front of you. Just launch right into it. You don't have to let us listen for 2 minutes about what you're saying. It's all this built up. It's so annoying. Very early in the episode, Meghan also talks about how she's up at night, or she had been up at night just a month prior, just ruminating over every micro detail about her brand launch, particularly packaging, about the packaging. Was it going to be biodegradable? What was like the packing inserts going to be like? She was shocked to hear of a phenomenon called porch pirates. She didn't know what that was, all this kind of stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, that doesn't ring true, because if you are following Meghan, you could be a dissenter or you could be a fan, but you know that she ran into a lot of trademark problems and she couldn't launch her initial brand idea, which was American Riviera Orchard. Now, if she's gonna freak out about micro details around packaging, I was just left scratching my head wondering, why weren't you focused on all the details having to do with the trademark of your old business idea? It's just really, really weird stuff like that. It's just strange. She also describes Whitney, I'm reading from my notes here, she also describes Whitney as someone who's able to cut through the noise and focus on what truly matters. And I feel like, okay, then you need to follow Whitney's advice then, because I think the packaging is probably, I mean, it's important, but I don't think it should be something that is keeping you up at night. It seems like we might be focusing on the wrong things here, Meghan. It just, maybe you might want to make sure that other parts of the wheel of the business is running smoothly before we lose tons and tons of sleep over packaging. And another thing that I was left scratching my head with about this podcast is I noticed that she is framing it over and over in the podcast, the narrative being that she is building her business. She's at the inception of her business. She's building it. It's new. I couldn't help but wonder. She has been afforded so many opportunities. She's had so many resources in the way of contacts and money, cash flow. And she was offered a $1 million Netflix deal 5 years ago. So over the course of the last 5 years, she's been afforded opportunity after opportunity with Netflix, with Spotify, all these different things. How can you still be in the building phase? I don't quite understand what's going on here, but her reality in conceptualizing, building, and crafting a business are completely different from people like me out here who are trying to just do a small thing online. I mean, we don't have the money, the resources, the contacts that she does. We're in building. She's beyond building, but I think she frames it as always that she's a novice, that she's a business neophyte. She's just kind of new out here trying to get advice from all these movers and shakers, so that if we criticize stuff that's going on, that she can say, well, I'm just building. Why are you criticizing me? So I think that that is a very carefully crafted thing that she's presenting. She's constantly reminding us that she is in the building phase of the business. So if something goes wrong, it's not her, because she's building. She's building. She's been building for a long time. A really long time. Just saying. As we get a little bit more into the episode, to be fair, Meghan actually does hang back quite a bit and ask Whitney questions and allow Whitney to expand on a lot of her points, albeit they're not business points. They're not getting into the meat and potatoes about business, which would have been nice. It's a lot of how they've been victimized and all the struggles that they've had and that type of thing. But at least she lets Whitney speak. I did notice that. So kudos to Meghan. And I'm sure there was someone on her team saying, look, you got to hang back a little bit and you got to let people talk, because in Archetypes, it really, really was the Meghan show. They should have just called it the Meghan show. Then it comes to more of the victim narrative, where Whitney brings up Whitney's impressions of the way that Meghan has been treated in the press over the years. So I'm going to read to you a little bit from the transcript. I would like to play some stuff. I don't know if I want to, because sometimes you can take a hit. Anything that is associated with that woman, if there's criticism out there, she has all kinds of copyright claims on everything. She did that for the whole Netflix with Love deal. Whitney says to her, when I see the way that you've been treated in the media, which is a magnitude I'll never understand, but my heart breaks for you. It's like, it's not fair and it's brutalizing. And then Meghan says back to her, maybe because you understand it in whatever degree, you know how to show up for me. Now, to give you a little bit of context, before they start talking about that, Meghan alludes to the fact that I guess Whitney had been attacked mercilessly in the media and on social media when she left Tinder, the company, and there were lawsuits and different things going on. And then Meghan says something to the effect of, well, we don't need to get into that because we all know that. Well, like I said, I don't know who Whitney is. I don't know anything about her story or what she went through. It would be nice to hear it, but we don't need to hear about Whitney's story, ladies and gentlemen, because we need to go talk about Meghan and talk about everything that's happened to Meghan in the press and how she's been a victim. Whitney is saying what happened to you was so brutal and it wasn't fair. And Meghan just replies as saying, yeah, you experienced it too, to whatever degree that was. But yeah, and it's nice because you know how to show up for me. Well, when you say that you've experienced it to whatever degree, that's very dismissive of what Whitney went through. And she's just going back to, oh, but you show up for me. You're such a good friend. And that's another thing. Everybody that she talks to on her old podcast or even this one, everyone that she speaks to is not an acquaintance, is not a business associate. They're a very dear, dear, dear friend. Everyone's a dear friend and a close confidant. She always has to frame it as if everybody, like she is thick as thieves with every single person that she talks to. It's very strange. You don't have to be best friends with everybody in your life that is a friend or an acquaintance. You can have friends and you can have acquaintances and you can have healthy emotional distance, and not even on purpose, just because that's just the nature of that friendship, that association. But she wants to build, I believe, a false sense of intimacy with people that she's with. And she also wants to come across as being the type of person that can instantly build strong, intimate relationships with people, so that I guess somehow she'll come across as more relatable. Again, I've said this over and over. She's always trying to sell herself. She doesn't have to do that. She doesn't have to sell anything about herself to us. Just give us the goods. Talk to us about the business stuff. That's why we're here. That's why we're showing up listening to this thing. So Whitney is going on about the magnitude of negativity in the press that Meghan suffered, and she's telling a little personal anecdote, a story that she experienced, and I'm going to read it to you from the transcript. And she said, "Can I share the story of where I had that revelation?" So the revelation of how negatively Meghan was being treated, brutalized, as Whitney said. She said, "I was walking through the airport in Ireland. I stopped through the airport in Ireland and I walked over by whatever their equivalent of like a W.H. Smith or whatever those Hudson News are. Yes, my jaw hit the floor. You were the cover of every single newspaper and magazine in Ireland. Every single one said something different. I mean, random headline, random headline. You were the cover of every single one of those magazines, tabloids, and newspapers. I had this moment where I was like, this was a couple years ago. Yeah, Meghan says. I was like, holy F, oh my God. Sorry, Lord. I'm in Ireland. She's back home in California with her kids doing school drop-off, and she's the front page of every single one of those things. What are they talking about? There's no content. There's nothing to say. I just had this moment where I was like, wow, this is a different beast. And then Meghan says to her, but it doesn't feel different whether it's at that scale or not. And then she says to Meghan, you know, it takes a very, very strong cookie to go through a media storm like that. And Meghan says, yeah, you know, that was a couple of years ago. And I'm thinking to myself, a couple of years ago, what she's probably referencing is the firestorm in the media, the aftermath of what their Netflix series produced in the press, because they were hurling some very, very serious accusations at the royal family, both in the Oprah interview and in the Netflix documentary. So for both of these women to sit back and kind of posture and just be aghast and clutch their pearls as to, it was so mindless and so out of left field and just so, how incredulous to have all this negative press attention. Well, Harry and Meghan opened up a public conversation about it because they chose to sit down in front of a camera and levy accusations about their families to a national audience. So of course, newspapers and media and commentators and just normal Joes on social media are going to have things to say about it. So it's not like something happened in her life that she wanted to keep private, but it came out in the press and it was being reported on. It's like, no. What's happening is a reaction to things that they are doing. So I don't understand why Whitney seems to be so out of it, I guess, in the sense that she doesn't realize that everything that people say about Meghan in the press is a reaction to what she is doing. It's a reaction to her actions, to her and Harry's actions. And Meghan had said at one point something about false assumptions in the podcast. And I'm thinking to myself, it's not a false assumption. We are going by things that you are doing. We're forming opinions about you and your character because of things that you are doing and have done and have continued to do in the 5 years since you left that family. So she just expects that she's going to tell us who she is and what she's about, and that's going to be enough, and that it should be enough, and we should all just pipe down. When don't look at what she's doing. Don't look at what she has done. That's irrelevant because she's telling us who she is, and you cannot have it both ways. So I found that particularly interesting, was them just so aghast about all of this attention in the press that she would be on every cover. Well, you're married into the most famous family on the planet, and you're telling them that they're all horrible R's and how they abused you and your family and how they basically led her to want to unalive herself while she was pregnant with her first child. You're leveling some serious things, and that's what everyone's talking about. All these things that you're talking about on the Netflix show. But I guess we're not supposed to talk about it? Is it just supposed to be that she has, you know, Netflix and she has CBS and all these major outlets in her corner and all these newspapers and puff rags like people? She can put out all the stuff that she wants, but then no one can kind of say anything or even report on it. It's just very strange. And Harry has always just been very angry at the press. I'm not going to go into the whole Diana thing, but we all know that Diana was a wonderful person. She was beloved. I loved Diana. I cried when she died. I was very upset. But people that knew her also said that Diana also knew how to work the press when she needed to. Okay, so she wasn't a saint. She was a human being. She never claimed to be perfect. She wasn't wearing a seatbelt the night that she died, okay? That has not been in dispute. So there's so many factors that went into her death. Harry has always framed the press in the sense that the press unalived his mother and the press is out to unalive his wife, and that they won't stop until she is no more, which I think is a real black and white, not very measured or reasonable way to look at things. And it doesn't account for human frailty and things that might have occurred, that his, choices his mom has made. There's just so many things here. But it's all about the media is the big baddie that Harry is looking under the bed at night, every night, to make sure that they're not out to get him, when he uses it at every moment that he wants to put his narrative out there. You guys know exactly what I'm talking about. He wants to use the media to further his narratives, but if anybody writes anything about him that he disagrees with, they are the devil, absolute devil. Okay, moving on. And then about the 20-minute mark, she has an ad break for a company that I had never heard of called Jenny Kane. And then I looked it up. And what was funny was, as I was listening to the ad, a couple of seconds into the ad, I start realizing, is this supposed to be Meghan's voice? Because at one point in the ad, she says something to the effect of, oh, and if you know anything about me, you know how much I like my sweatshirts and my sweatpants. And I'm thinking to myself, so this is Meghan's writing. This is her, but it's an announcer reading the ad. So she can't even be brought to read her own ad copy, which I thought was really, really funny. And then they go into more about their pasts, and Whitney talks about how she has had bad relationships and she didn't love herself enough and she tolerated bad treatment, and she talks about how hurt people hurt others. And I'm thinking to myself, because Meghan doesn't really chime in at that point at all. And the first thing I thought about was how she broke up with her husband, Trevor, by sending her wedding rings through the post back to Trevor from Canada. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, that is a hurt person hurting somebody else. Because if you have entered into a marriage with somebody, I think that the dissolution of that marriage at least warrants one face-to-face interaction. But apparently Trevor wasn't worth that. And it was, I guess, entirely appropriate in Meghan's mind to just mail the wedding rings back. And then the two women start talking about self-love and loving yourself and all this kind of stuff, which I'm going to get into a little bit. I'm all for having a healthy level of self-respect and self-esteem. But the word salad was off the charts. I'm going to read to you what Meghan's talking about here from the transcript from the podcast. She's talking about, okay, you create a space with this is a quote from Meghan, okay? Tell me if you can follow along with this or if it's just me. I had to keep hitting the 15-second back thing because I was just asking myself, what is she trying to say? I don't understand. You create a space with the intention, even if it morphed into something that ended up dating aligned. The origin was still about autonomy, self-love, making sure that you could really advocate for yourself and be in a relationship, or even the possibility of a relationship that's rooted in something that's healthy because it was so authentic to you. That's how you ended up scaling to the tremendous success that you were. I don't really understand this, but she's going on at length about self-love. And looking at my notes here, she wrote about how loving yourself is a revolutionary act. I think that we could probably argue that Meghan loves herself a whole heck of a lot because she has made the narrative that she puts out in the public for the last 5-6 years all about her and everything that she's been through and she's had to suffer. That's really indicative of what's wrong with our culture. Pretty much since the 1960s, it's been all about the focus on the individual. And I think it's reached epidemic proportions now with the advent of social media and everyone's look at me. It's this self-absorbed grandiosity, which is so characteristic of people with narcissistic personality disorders. It's all about the self-love and the self-importance to the exclusion of others, to the exclusion of others' feelings and their well-being and their experiences. To me, she just represents the idea of self-love, but taken to the extreme where the focus is so much on the sense of self that you don't really have time the energy or inclination to really give a hoot about anybody else. As humans, we are all about self-preservation. We are all about wanting to protect ourselves and make sure that we advance and we move forward and we are seen and heard. But it's gotten to the point in our culture where people don't care about other people anymore. People are just all about themselves. And to me, Meghan represents those personality traits, which can start out okay and can start out healthy, but it morphs into unhealthy levels and it turns into almost self-worship. So I'm just getting really, really tired of this whole girl boss, look after yourself, you're the most important type of narrative that's been so pervasive in our culture. And I kind of feel like it's finally starting to die down a little bit. But you know, Meghan, she's always behind the times. And she's still, I think in 2015, when this girl boss thing was huge. So that's this idea and this thing that she still wants to perpetuate and throw out into the media. But she's doing it because she's trying to say, I was a victim, but now I'm going to self-love and I'm going to come out and I'm going to triumph. And no one needs to feel sorry for her, least of all herself. She's been afforded every single opportunity. She has built up her image at this point where she is now. She got the name recognition and the worldwide fame through marriage. I mean, let's call it what it is. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But then to frame yourself as a victim, it's just so tiresome. It's old. So now we're going to get to the part of the video when Meghan talks about she had preeclampsia. I'm just going to read to you the transcript. So the build up to the part about talking about the preeclampsia is just them talking about juggling motherhood and all those things. And Meghan says, and we both had very similar experiences that we didn't know each other at the time with postpartum. And Whitney says, yeah. And Meghan says, and we both had eclampsia. Oh God. Sorry, God. Can you believe we both had it? It's so rare, Whitney says. And Meghan says, it's so rare. And Whitney says, and so scary. Meghan says, yeah, it's scary. And then Meghan continues and she says, and you go and you're still trying to juggle all of these things and the world doesn't know what's happening quietly. And in the quiet, you're still trying to show up for people. And in the quiet, you're still just trying to show up mostly for your children. But those things are huge medical scares. And Whitney says, I mean life or death, truly. It's really scary. And then after that exchange, Whitney talks about how she will never forget the image of Meghan presenting Archie to the world a couple of days after his birth. And Whitney says, quote, like, how is this woman putting on heels and going and debuting a child in this beautiful outfit in front of the entire world? Like, I could barely face a doorbell delivery for takeout food. Okay, you guys, so the reason why I was really upset and taking this story to task is because Harry said in his book Spare, now if we're talking about Archie, now mind you, she does not say whether the preeclampsia that she experienced happened with Archie or with her daughter Lily. However, it's strongly alluded to the fact that it more than likely was with Archie because Meghan doesn't correct Whitney when Whitney then goes in to say, yeah, and after all of this to dress up and show Archie to the world, how could she do that? So the listener is probably, and rightly so, led to believe that this is something that she experienced with the birth of Archie. And if that is indeed the case, then I don't understand why in Harry's book Spare, he said that they were released back from the hospital, from the Portland Hospital in London, and back at Frogmore Cottage within 2 hours of delivery. If a woman suffered from preeclampsia, it is highly unlikely that she would be discharged on the same day, never mind 2 hours after delivery. Now, I don't know if she had a hospital set up in Frogmore Cottage and a whole medical team around her. She's never given us any explanation. She's never given us any context. And that was my big problem with that. And I'm going to explain to you a little bit about what this condition is, what happened to me. Like I said in the introduction, they're bringing it up, but then they're not going into it at all. This is a shared life or death medical trauma. They both say it. It's a life or death medical illness. Why not talk about it just a little bit more? Give us some context. I was a geriatric pregnancy when I had my twins. I had just turned 39 years old the month prior. They were born in April and I turned 39 in March. So I was what was considered a geriatric pregnancy. That is one of the factors that can contribute to preeclampsia and eclampsia. Also, having more than one baby. So I had two factors. I was delivering twins and I was 39 years old. So for me, that is pretty much why I developed it. But to give you guys a little bit of context and a little bit of explanation, because Meghan didn't. So if my story can help anybody, that's why I'm telling it. So I delivered my twins April 2013. I was living in London at the time. My husband was working. We delivered at the Portland hospital, which is again why this story feels really close to home for me. I had gone a little bit over 35 weeks. And if you're pregnant with twins, that's considered full term. I was experiencing symptoms of high blood pressure. My extremities were swelling. My vision was starting to get blurred. I was in close communication with my medical staff, my consultant in London at the time. They were monitoring my condition. My blood pressure had been rising steadily in the weeks prior to delivering, and they also noticed that my blood platelet counts were starting to get low. So I checked into the hospital because my doctor said, get your butt into the hospital. I checked in, and about 20 minutes after check-in on that evening, I started bleeding out. So that's why they decided to do an emergency C-section then. The babies were fine, they were healthy, everything was okay, but my preeclampsia started about 4 hours after I delivered them. So someone might have been listening to this podcast, might not even really know what preeclampsia is. Maybe they are pregnant and they really wanted to know. I'm going to share with you how my journey went. At the onset, my blood pressure was 230 over 130. I was being monitored throughout the night. I received what they call booster shots of magnesium sulfate, and that is meant to calm and get the blood pressure down. Because what preeclampsia basically is, it's a disorder of extremely high blood pressure. And what it can lead to is something called eclampsia, which is when the body's blood pressure gets so high that the woman starts experiencing seizures. Meghan says that she developed preeclampsia after she delivered the baby, which is what happened to me. So it's characterized by extremely high blood pressure, which can eventually lead to seizures if untreated. It's also characterized by extremely high levels of protein in the urine. And the reason why that needs to be addressed is because when you have high volume of protein in the urine, that usually means that your kidneys and other organs are being affected. The kidneys are what effectively filter out the proteins in our bloodstream. And when the kidneys start failing and getting affected, that protein can leak into the urine. So that's a test that doctors do to determine if someone is in preeclampsia or is in danger of developing it. Another super scary thing about preeclampsia is that it can also lead to a condition called HELP syndrome. I developed HELP syndrome, and what that is an acronym for is basically for hemolysis. I'll put it up on the screen, but that's basically when your red blood cells, it's the destruction of them. They start dying. It also stands for elevated liver enzymes and low platelet count. That means low platelets in your bloodstream. At the worst of my ordeal, my blood platelet count was 48. That's considered class 1 HELP syndrome. They classify it class 1, 2, and 3, and class 1 is the most severe. And 48 basically means a 48,000 unit liter measurement of the platelets in your bloodstream. So that means that that's really low count. Now, the normal range I have here in my notes is between 150 and 450, and I was at around 118 the day before I delivered, and my doctor was telling my husband that At 80, it's considered extremely serious. So by the time all was said and done with me, I was at about 48. Now, I was administered bolster shots over the period of an entire evening in an effort to try to lower my elevated heart rate. You don't want a crazy high heart rate because then your body starts going into seizures. Point being, this is a very serious thing. And I'm not even gonna say that how dare she bring it up now, because, time and place. If she wanted to bring it up now and it really happened to her, fine. But what I'm saying is if you're gonna bring it up, you need to talk about it a little bit more. Don't just mention it in passing, because she has the reputation of wanting and loving to play the victim. She has the reputation of constantly trying to garner sympathy from the public. So if you're just gonna throw a tidbit out there that, oh, we both had it, but then not ask your guest about her experiences with it, or not relay your own experiences with it to your audience, what are you trying to do with it? What I was thinking was, okay, well, tell us a little bit more about it, because I know what it is. Why don't you tell other women about it? Women that might not know it exists, and how to look out for the warning signs so that it won't progress into that. Or maybe talk about it so that the people that have gone through it can maybe get to know you better and understand you a little bit more. So HELLP syndrome is awful too, and it's a serious complication of preeclampsia. Let's talk about it, Meghan. You might not have suffered from HELLP syndrome, but you suffered from preeclampsia. Give us a little bit. Give us something. What are the warning signs? What can we do to be proactive about it? Nothing. Nothing. I don't want to get too crazy about this, but when it happens to you, you do kind of get a little nutty. You don't really understand until you go through something and then you realize it. She threw out one little snippet, one little quip, and that is, I guess, supposed to be enough. Even though it was something that was apparently life and death, but she's just gonna throw out one sentence and then that's gonna be it. I don't understand the intent there. Unless you're gonna talk about it, why bring it up? So I wasn't there, you weren't there. She says that she suffered from this. I have some questions, but we got absolutely nothing. And she does like to go at length about things that have happened to her. She will go on about grievances and travesties that happened back in 2018 regarding bridesmaids' dresses, but yet she doesn't really go into too much detail about the things that she has decided to tell us about, like the fact that now she has suffered from this preeclampsia stuff. So you're really tight-lipped on the things that could probably actually help somebody, but I don't understand. Make this make sense to me. Anyone watching this video today that has gone through preeclampsia, eclampsia, or HELLP syndrome, or anyone you know or love has gone through this, I just want to say I'm so sorry. I support you. You are awesome. Preeclampsia, eclampsia, and HELLP syndrome is not a small thing. They are actually a little bit more common because more and more women are having babies later in life, so they're considered geriatric pregnancies. A lot of women have high blood pressure and a lot of stress in their lives, or if they have that running in their family. So long story short, it is not something that is so extremely rare and, this crazy thing that no one ever sees. Actually, quite the contrary. So there are things to know about it, symptoms to look out for. That's all I wanted from Meghan. That's all I wanted her to do, if you're gonna bring it up. So the last part I'll go over with you guys that struck me from the podcast, around the 37-minute mark or so, I'm just looking at my notes here. Meghan talks about, again, how she's in the building phase, and she talks about being in that phase and having young children at the same time, she feels gives her a great advantage. I guess what she means to say is having the kids are gonna ground her and center her a lot more. And she also goes into how building something for herself is a very high value aspect in her life. But then also when she's with her kids, there's a lot of wonderful high value things going on there too. So I just felt weird listening to her talk about her working career being high value and then stuff that's going on in the house being high value. I just kind of felt like you're dealing with commodities, things that can be traded and bought and sold. I don't know, talking about things that are of high value. And then I started thinking about it, being a parent, having a child, potty training a child, teaching a child to read, being there for your child, that's really high value. But then I thought, well, value denotes that there is a price for everything. This is high value, so that's why the price is high. Actually, having a child and being able to have a family, that's actually priceless. That doesn't even have a value. It's worth so much more than any value you can put on it. That's what I thought after listening to that. Just the way that she uses words and language, it's just very interesting. She's trying to, I guess, elevate the ordinary in everyday speech, but it just ends up coming across as so fake and hollow because from my Christian worldview and perspective, you cannot equate the two. Family is going to trump career every single time. I don't want to put the value on something like my home life and my family because to me that's priceless. So nothing of that conversation resonated with me at all. For me, it was a real non-starter. I didn't really get any business advice or any business wisdom from Whitney. It would have been nice to get into the trenches a little bit and actually talk about, like I said, how is your day structured as an entrepreneur? What are the best marketing tips? There was just none of that. And then you go into all the self-victimization narratives. We are fabulously wealthy. We're still not satisfied. And in between that and the fawning over each other and then talking about preeclampsia, but using only one sentence to talk about it in, it was just, I had had enough. So that is my take on that podcast. If you want to listen, by all means, you're not going to get any business advice. You're going to get some really nice stories about what it's like to be a victim. So yeah, guys, that is my assessment of the first episode. I can't guarantee I'm going to talk about much more than that. Maybe if there's one that's particularly triggering, but whatevs. So thank you guys so much for spending this time with me. I will talk to you very, very soon. Bye.